Hello everybody, my name is Kyle Morton. I'm a biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the Lower Great Lakes Fish and Wildlife Conservation Office. In this presentation we're going to be talking about an acoustic telemetry project on adult lake sturgeon in Lake Ontario, kind of looking at the boundaries of the management units and how effective they might actually be. So looking at three main goals of this project, or three main questions that led to the development of this project is the Eastern Lake Ontario Management Unit biologically functional? So currently biologists there are looking at adult population estimates. However, they're kind of struggling to narrow estimates down to a really, a quality estimate that we have trust in. And a lot of the reasoning behind this large error bars is the fact that a lot of individuals in this population seem to be emigrating, and specifically from the Black River Bay population. And so another question we're going to look at, how are the spawning movements in the system? Are they considerable? Are they frequent? And how do adults spend their time in this management unit? And so to break that apart a little bit, we're also looking at how these Eastern Lake Ontario Management Unit adults utilize the open Lake Ontario water body and also the St. Lawrence River. And lastly, do lake sturgeon show high site fidelity to the management unit they were originally tagged in? AKA, if I tag a fish in the Black River Bay population, how often does it actually spend its time in that Eastern Lake Ontario Management Unit? And so a little bit of introduction on the methods here. We're utilizing acoustic telemetry, which is a fish tracking method where we implant a transmitter inside of the body cavity of a lake sturgeon, and then it swims around, and this transmitter spits a unique code out every 2 to 4 minutes. And we have acoustic receivers, which you can see in the bottom left and partially the bottom right of the screen behind my head. And these are basically toll booths for the fish. As the fish swims by and transmits its code, the receiver is going to collect which fish it heard and when it heard it, which is really important for us to kind of draw this timeline of where these fish are moving around. And then to kind of just to hone in on one of the important management groups or management units in this project is the Eastern Lake Ontario Management Unit. And for the sake of this project, we're looking at two populations within this unit. One at the Black River Bay population, or at the Black River Bay, excuse me, and one outside of the Oswego River, and there are adult individuals being collected from that system as well. So looking at the sample size in this project, we've got 4 main populations and 2 management units that we're kind of looking at here. So the 4 populations are the Lower Niagara River, the Genesee River, the Oswego River, and again the Black River Bay population. And so the Lower Niagara and the Genesee, those are in the Western Lake Ontario Management Unit, as we can see on the furthest right column. And then the Oswego River and Black River is in the Eastern Lake Ontario Management Unit, as again you can see in the rightmost column. And so you can see that our total N, which is how many fish we're tagging in each system, is very variable. However, in the Lower Niagara and the Genesee, we're going to take a subsample, a random sample of this population so that we have 20 individuals. So that way we've got equal individuals per system. And leading into 2025, we're actually hoping to tag some more fish in the Oswego River and the Black River Bay populations to kind of just give us a little bit more confidence in some of the results that we're seeing here. So I want to show you a little bit of what this data looks like so you can help wrap your brain around what is going on here. So here's a map of the Lake Ontario and St. Lawrence River, and a lot of different colored dots. So the 4 different colors represent the tagging origin, as you can see on the right-hand side. And you can notice that some of the dots on this map are more hollow or translucent than the others. And this is related to some of the math that we're doing to gain a better insight about what these fish are doing. And those are interpolated positions, aka positions that we didn't actually detect a fish at, but we're relatively confident that this is close to their vicinity based on their time and detection. So we can just see that there's a lot of activity going on all throughout this lake. And kind of to get another better representation of this, we're going to look at an animation here. And so we can see that the green or turquoise dots, those are the Lower Niagara River fish. The gray dots at the south end are the Genesee River fish. Then we've got a light blue dot, and that's coming from the Oswego River, and a dark blue dot, which is coming from the Black River Bay. And so this is kind of another way just again to visualize what the data is actually looking like here. We could see fish moving around. We could see them slowing down towards the winter months and speeding up, especially during the spring, during their spawning periods. And we're not going to watch this whole entire animation, although I wish we could. They're always so much fun to look at. But again, I just want to help wrap your heads around what the data from this project kind of looks like. And so we're going to go back to the why questions and kind of break them down with our results here to try and just answer them as best as possible. So we're going to start with, is the Eastern Lake Ontario Management Unit biologically meaningful? And so the two metrics here that we're looking at are there fish in the Eastern Basin making spawning movements in the east? And do they spend a significant amount of time here? And so what we're looking at is a proportion, basically proportional locations of lake sturgeon that were tagged in the Eastern Lake Ontario Management Unit. So for this figure, we're ignoring the lower Niagara River fish and the Genesee River fish. And so what we're looking at here is, as a line is higher up on the graph, we're looking at an increased proportion of the fish. So the higher the line, the more fish are present in that location. And the location is described by the color of the line. And those gray bars that are sticking up, right around June, that's to kind of hone our eyes into what we think the spawning window is. And so we could see that the kind of right after the fish are tagged, just a few months to maybe 6 months afterwards, we drop down to about only 60% of the fish actually remaining in the Eastern Lake Ontario Management Unit, while most of that proportion has gone over to the Western Lake Ontario Management Unit. Although we can also see a few individuals are showing up in the St. Lawrence River, which is indicated by the yellow and turquoise lines. And something that's really interesting, that lower St. Lawrence River Management Unit is all the way at the Lake St. Francis. And so there's actually 7 out of the 40 individuals that were tagged in the Eastern Management Unit currently persisting in the St. Lawrence River, at least at the last point of data that we have. But something that's also really interesting, if you look into those gray shaded regions, is that there's this proportional increase, and it's a little variable in size, but nonetheless, it indicates that there is potential that these fish that are being tagged in the Eastern Lake Ontario Management Unit are returning for spawning. And so now we're going to be focusing a little bit more about the time that they spend within each system, or that site fidelity we were talking about earlier. So on the x-axis, we've got 5 different Lake Ontario lake locations, starting with the eastern lake portion, eastern rivers, which is primarily the Black River Bay and Oswego River. Then we've got the St. Lawrence River, and then we've got the West Lake and the West Rivers, which is primarily the lower Niagara and Genesee River. Now we see a lot of box plots here and a lot of points, but I want to focus in on the colors of each of these box plots. So the black boxes that coincides with the Black River population. The Oswego River is the salmon colored boxes, and the Genesee River fish are the teal colored boxes. So for this figure, we're ignoring the lower Niagara River fish. And so what we could see here is that when a fish is tagged in the East Lake, aka the black and the salmon colored boxes, most of their time being spent, aka the residency index percents being higher, those fish are remaining in those portions of the lake for a substantial amount of time. And then fish that are tagged in the western portion of the lake, aka the Genesee River, those fish also seem to remain in those systems as well. But we also could see when we look at the West Lake portion that there is a considerable amount of Oswego River fish spending their time in the Western Lake Ontario Management Unit. So moving on to our next why question is, how do Black River and Oswego River adults utilize the Open Lake and St. Lawrence systems? To look into this question, we kind of thought it would be interesting to look at how far each fish travels and whether that differs among the tagging groups. And so what we could see here on the x-axis is date. It's a little tricky, but 0 effectively is January 1st, and then 364, which is as far right as we go, is going to be December 31st. And so right around 125 is where we're looking at May and June, which is the spawning season. And so on the y-axis, we're looking at the total distance in meters that fish are traveling. And so I created these regression lines to kind of look at the average daily movement distance that the lake sturgeon travel in the lake. And it's really quite surprising, really interesting as well. So primarily I want to focus on the black line and the salmon colored line, where those both kind of show quite a bit of difference here, where the Black River fish don't seem to be traveling nearly as far, but they still have this spawning peak where once spawning season rolls around, they might be traveling to their spawning grounds. And then they also have this pre-winter peak where their movement increases as well, leading into the winter months. Where the Oswego River fish, those seem to be traveling considerably more, and those spawning peaks where their movement increases seem to be accentuated a little bit here. But what's also really interesting, and why I threw these other lines on here, is that the Oswego River and the Genesee River are primarily stocked individuals. So they're hatchery raised individuals, and so they're being supplemented into the systems to help the population sizes, while the lower Niagara River and the Black River populations have some wild remnants contributing to the population size. And we're kind of seeing that these stocked populations consist of fish that travel more frequently and seem to be traveling more often, which I just thought was a little interesting as well. Another way to look at this without those fancy lines is with just raw data points, so their daily movement distances. And now I want you to hone into the y-axis. In the last figure, you might have thought, wow, 4 kilometers, that's not a lot of movement from a fish in a single day. Well, that's really drawn in by these small movements. And also when a fish is detected on a receiver multiple times, its odds are that we're telling us, the math is telling us that this fish hasn't moved at all, even though we know that it probably has. And so now we can really see that these spawning movements can sometimes, provide us fish that are moving 30 to 50 kilometers each day just to get to their spawning grounds and make spawning movements. And so moving on into our next question is, do lake sturgeon show high site fidelity to the management unit that they were originally tagged? To answer this question, we're going to look back at our residency index that we pulled up before, where we're kind of looking at the time that all of these fish are spending in each group. And the only group that really deviates from the system that they were tagged in is the Oswego River fish. Albeit it's a really small proportion, generally speaking, where some of those fish are spending a considerable amount of time in the western lake portion. But some of the telemetry data is suggesting that those fish, although they spend time in the West Lake systems, return back to the Eastern Lake Ontario Management Unit come spawning season. And so, that's kind of about all of the data that we have. This project is still in its infancy. We're still tagging more fish, and in terms of acoustic telemetry, we need a lot of time. We need to wait a few years before we really start to see patterns from these fish. And so what's next? Again, we're tagging more fish in the Oswego and Black River systems to try and buff up our sample size, which would also increase our confidence in what we're seeing. And again, we're giving it time. We need to wait a few years. These tags that we're putting in the fish provide up to 10 years worth of data. So hopefully, in 7 more years, we've got so much data that we don't even know what to do with it. And then lastly, we're going to be looking more at important habitats. So what are these portions of the lake that fish really seem to be utilizing, not just within the context of a management unit, but in terms of small habitats, especially in the St. Lawrence River. And so that concludes this presentation. If you've got any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email me at kyle_morton@fws.gov. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.